Blinking?
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
So I'm about to dash off to the airport after a week of being here, and it's been a week of ups and downs. It's definitely a way of learning how to deal with uncertainty. There's so many things that we don't know about, and we're learning as we go, and have to keep being open-minded and ready to think about new things and incorporate new information. There's all sorts of things about the Syrian culture, about the refugee camp culture, about what we can do or not do. We're used to being able to be bolder and quicker on our feet. We have to be more sensitive and a bit more careful here. And uncertainty about how to adapt the processes that we use so that they work for people here. So for instance, with researching, with understanding the refugees' point of view and what they're looking for, it would be brilliant if I could speak to them directly and in their own language, but I don't speak Arabic, so I had to adapt the process and find ways around that, and ways that the research can carry on when I'm not here as well. So this system we developed of training up young adults, a lot of girls, and lots of 14-year-old girls, has been really interesting, because it made me have to simplify the system and really focus on what do we most need to know, and streamline that aspect, and then develop a way of finding out the information that was going to be robust against different people doing it, people who weren't used to researching doing it, and then training them. And at first I really had my doubts about whether that was going to work at all, because of the status of women in society, and the meekness really of these were 13-14-year-old girls. So at first they were in a mixed group of boys and girls, and they were barely even speaking, because women don't speak if men are speaking, and the boys were more confident and more prepared to have their voices heard. But then already on the second day they felt completely different. They felt at home in the setup. They knew me a bit by then, and they walked in like, here we are, we've come to do our training, we're going to do our job. They looked like air stewardesses suddenly, magically really, because they were wearing exactly the same clothes, but they changed from looking like little girls to looking like young women who knew what they were doing, and they were going to go and do it, and they were going to be able to do it, and it was lovely to see that change in them, and the way they bonded together a bit as a group. Because I think it's not easy probably for someone to develop friends in a camp. When you first arrive, you're completely overwhelmed and confused and shocked at what's happening to you, and there are not many ways for them to find each other. They wouldn't just go and hang out at the local bowling alley, because there isn't that sort of thing going on. So I think it's also interesting to see them, because they're working together, they respect each other, and they see each other being able to do something, and that gives them a way of relating to each other.
So interesting. It's kind of doing something, befriending somebody while doing something is very different. It's easier to develop a forward-looking way of developing.
Yeah, there's not the same focus on the friendship development. It's a consequence, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rather than an objective. And so then when they were in that state where they were comfortable with what they were doing, they became our bridge into the shelters, because there's things you can see happening in the refugee camp, people walking about and going to the shop or going to the community activities, and then there's an awful lot of secluded activity, particularly in the more traditional families where the women are not allowed to leave, not allowed to go out and socialise in case they're seen. So to be able to visit them in the shelters was quite a privilege, to and I wasn't doing anything. I was just accompanying the girls, but it's that kind of mentor, I guess. And
So in a way, it worked. It worked in a way that you created something that then opened access to you as a researcher as well. 'Cause you wouldn't have been able to go in and knock at the door and get any answers directly.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. And they were happy for me to sit there and just observe while the girls asked them the questions, and I think they were happy to be asked the questions as well. I got the sense that even though they were a bit shy about it at first, it was a worthwhile thing for them to think about what had they done yesterday, and who had they seen, and had they learned anything.
Mm-hmm.
Often it was more often the women who said they hadn't learnt anything, and you could see that was giving them some pause for thought as well while they were saying that.
Mm.
Kind of, oh yeah, I didn't, and that's like the first tentative step towards wanting to, and then to making something happen.
That's fantastic. Like realizing that you haven't.
And sometimes you're just holding up a mirror with research, and
Yes.
yeah. So I would love to see a way of allowing them a life outside their home and their immediate family. Those very isolated women, because it's bad enough what they've been through and what they're going through, but to also have no friends and no sense of neighbourliness, or who you go to when you're worried about your baby, who you confide in that things aren't the way you want them to be at home, who you ask, how on earth do you cook on this sort of primitive, very basic cooking equipment. I'm not used to that from when I had my own house in Syria. Or just understanding the systems and how to access information or access equipment. We saw really quite a range of capability in the different shelters, that some people really seem to have got it organised, and they'd found out ways of scavenging bits of waste product and bits of leftover stuff or somebody else's stuff.
And things from the villages that weren't occupied.
Yeah, some of it, yeah. Some of it's just waste, and some people are more inventive than others about how to use that, and maybe more committed to their space than others, that they've decided this is where they are now, so they're going to make it as good as they can for their families, and do that with ingenuity and commitment to just making the best of a bad job.
How do you feel that we've done as a team? I mean, coming in so far.
I really appreciated yesterday when some of the staff were around and we knew things and we discovered things that they were interested in hearing about. So that really made me feel like in a short time we've managed to get under the skin a bit of the place and understand some of the human dynamics that are going on, about the way people relate to spaces. What's missing from this public spaces.
For example?
So for example, we didn't see anywhere where you might just sit with a few friends, and that would need to be a shady spot because the heat is brutal. But there are no trees because of the climate and the landscape, so there isn't a place where you would just naturally gather. There aren't places. Apart from seeing people walking along roads, we didn't see people with each other, interacting with each other.
In public space.
And public space could offer them that, yeah. And maybe there need to be public spaces that feel safe for the women, that the men don't mind the women going to.
Yeah. What about the mosque?
Yeah. So a completely different sort of public space we saw was with the mosque that the refugees had made for themselves, and we kind of stumbled upon that. We thought it was a normal house extension, except that it seemed so big. Then the volunteers, the staff we were with, helped us find out what was going on, and when we stepped inside, it was quite extraordinary because they'd created a sense of space with a few basic things and a lot of imagination, and it felt like a space that they cared for, that they cared about, that they'd made for themselves and for each other. Maybe a long way from the sort of institutional feeling that a lot of the camp has, that they were just put there and they'd conform to what was required of them. But here was something that was their initiative, and their love had gone into it, and you could feel the difference.
So you reckon we'll be able to do something anywhere close to that?
Well, I'm sure it's always possible to get people to make spaces for themselves with a couple of catalysts or triggers that change the thinking, and the combination of people reflecting on their circumstances and being given permission, not being told this is what we're doing now, but given permission to do something. It's quite a different direction of travel, and being encouraged to do that. And at the beginning, that's going to be probably more them helping you with your artwork development, and then hopefully as they get more into that, they'll, like with the rocks, that started off that when they were dipping the rocks, they were doing what they were told to do, and then they got it, and then they were like always pushing you out the way, weren't they? And yes, this is what we're doing now.
And they started mixing colours. I asked them not to, because of the problem of the colour ending up being all sort of mixed up.
Brown, yeah.
But they just would listen. They love the mixing, and they just took it in their own direction.
Yeah, and they loved the glitter. So seeing the way they worked with the glitter, I thought it was really interesting. It wasn't just because we tend to associate glitter with small children, and they turned it into an art form.
The way they were blowing it. And
stuff. Blowing it from their hands onto the rocks.
And did you have a intuition that they were going to be taken away?
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, when I saw that there were people approaching them, once the activity had finished and the rocks were all hanging up to dry, it was like going into Aladdin's cave. The look on their faces, like they had found treasure, and they were drawn to the rocks. They weren't saying, "Oh well, maybe I'll nick that." They were pulled towards them, and then at first just looking at them with wonder, and then wanting to touch them, and then wondering. You could sort of see the thought developing, and maybe I can just sneak this one away into my life and make it mine. Because there's a shortage of beautiful things, there's a shortage of individualized things. There's so much uniformity, and everybody's in the same shelter, everybody gets the same survival kit, the same blanket, the same mattress, and that urge for individuality emerged through the rock making, didn't it? And we did hundreds of rocks, and everyone was different.
There's also something that there's no paint available to them, really.
Yeah, sure.
So there are certain materials like the UN's blankets, and they all have there's a palette that they're used to, and they sort of work in different ways. But colour, there's very, very little. So this is like another resource that they could.
In a very colourful culture, with a history of textiles and ceramics and making.
Brilliant. I think we got it.